Am I on? Hello, good morning. Hello there. Wow, we filled up a room first thing in the morning. Hooray for you. My name is Jon Galloway. I work for Microsoft. Microsoft donates my time to the .NET Foundation. So if you're interested in the .NET Foundation, if you don't know what it is, I'll talk your ear off. But basically, it is separate from Microsoft, and all of Microsoft's open source .NET stuff is actually owned by the .NET Foundation, which is cool for a lot of reasons. I'll talk to you about that later if you're interested. This is my Twitter handle, Jon Galloway. I'm going to be, let me see if I have I have about 9,000 tabs open, like literally in Chrome right now, because for this talk, I had so many references and things I wanted to add in, way more than I could fit in. And so I will tweet out a link to this and more references if you're interested. So here is, I'll show this again at the end, but this is a gist where I've got kind of all this stuff, including links and everything. This is actually like a work in progress. If you go to this right now, it's not going to have all the latest links. So I will paste more of them in there. But this is kind of a thing I've been building out over time. And really the idea is when you do File New Project, Microsoft gives you a template for ASP.NET. If you're not interested in ASP.NET, you're in the wrong room. This is ASP.NET Core. We're going to be talking about ASP.NET Core 2.2. So when you do File New Project, we give you a list of things we think most people will want. There are tons of features in ASP.NET Core. We try and give you some sensible defaults. We try to give you what most projects will use. There's a lot of other stuff that's available, and we don't want to throw everything at you. We don't want to clutter up your project. And you'll actually see over time, if you used earlier versions of ASP.NET Core, if you remember, the startup.cs was huge, right? And you had to go through, and you're scared to touch it, because maybe it'll break something, and you don't know, and I don't know, right? So we really did try to slim that down. Some of that means that there are options turned off or things that aren't available. There's also a lot of features that we continue to ship over time. I assume a lot of you, if you're interested in ASP.NET, you went and saw David and Damien's talks yesterday, and they talked about some things in ASP.NET Core 2.2 and 3 that are coming. So there's new features that are coming at you. A lot of these you have to kind of opt into. Then finally, there are a lot of really cool community libraries and things out there. Microsoft builds some things. We ship kind of some standard things. We're more than happy to let the community fill in and provide libraries and things that we think a lot of people will want to use. We're happy to recommend them. So if you watch, there's a mostly weekly show. We're not doing it this week because I'm here, but there's my 9,000 tabs. I told you. So we do the show, live.asp.net. We've been doing this for, 1,000 years now. So this is Damien and Scott Hanselman and myself, and then we bring on other people, PMs, different people that are building things for ASP.NET Core, and we show kind of sneak peeks. And so you'll also see, if you want to keep up, this is a place where you can do that. The reason I'm talking about this is at the very beginning of this, it's called the Community Standup, and part of what we like to do is feature things that the community is building. So this includes libraries, all kinds of cool stuff. And so every show I feature at least 10 links, sometimes like up to 20. And this is every single time, right? So the community is building tons of stuff. Obviously, we can't fit all of those into one project, although I sure tried. But I want to highlight some of those. So when I was kind of looking at this, I was thinking, what are some things that we're going to want to add into just about every project? And so I think we covered kind of the intro, who I am and all that stuff. As far as goals and non-goals, I'm not going to describe the perfect one-size-fits-all solution. I'm going to show you some cool tips, some things I like to use. Some things I think are kind of generally useful. There's tons more, and I'm going to mention some, and I'm going to skip over some. So what I'd like you to do is think about what are some things I would like to do in a standard project. I obviously don't have time to cover anything in real detail, so I'm just going to show you some kind of check this out kind of stuff. So hopefully you'll get some ideas of things that you could do in your projects. This is kind of what we'll work through, is number one, picking the right starting template. I'm going to mostly be using Visual Studio. Everything I do here can be done in Visual Studio Code, can be done on Mac, Linux, et cetera. The first time I've done this talk, I did it at NDC Sydney also, and I did everything command line and VS Code and stuff, and a few people were like, whoa, that's way too hard. And so I'm kind of trying to bounce back and forth. So I'll show some stuff in command line or call out how to do it, but I'll show a lot of this in Visual Studio. So the things I'm going to work through, the starting template, source control, and solution structure, kind of how I would structure a solution. And again, this is something you ask any developer, every single developer, every shop will do it different. But I'll show you some tips of how to set that up. And then we'll just kind of look through some kind of standard things, the front end, what's there, and how we can kind of improve on it. Maintainability, setting up a project so that you can continue to maintain and evolve it over time. And then a few things that we can kind of turn on for performance. So let's dig in. So let's start with looking at the right template. So I'm just using Visual Studio 2017. 2019 is out, but nothing new or exciting for this. So if I go into Visual Studio and create a new ASP.NET Core application, so we will call this one I don't think I've used that. So one thing I want to point out right away is I'm going to be creating a directory for the solution. I'm going to create a Git repository just right off the bat, right from scratch. I'm also not going to start off with an ASP.NET Core web application. I'm going to start out with a solution. And there's two ways to do this. One is, one kind of thing probably a lot of people don't notice, there's this, you can create a blank solution. So the reason I'm going to do that is so that I can add in tests, I can add in a web application, I could add in APIs, et cetera. You can also do this from command line, and I actually recommend if you're going to be doing this regularly, that is one way you can do that. You can script that, right? So you can do .NET new solution, and you can add things to an existing solution. So there we go. We have created an empty solution. So now I'm going to go and actually add in new ASP.NET Core application. And this should be, not shocking to anyone, but picking the right web app. So picking the right web app template is going to be useful. I'm going to be showing a mostly static site. I'm not going to be building out a front-end heavy application, single-page app. However, if you're going to, I highly recommend using one of these. So those are built using JavaScript services. They're built with Webpack set up. They're built really kind of optimized for a lot of stuff that will take you a while to get set up otherwise. So you definitely can do it if you are super duper front-end dev, you've kept up with the 3 JavaScript frameworks that have shipped since this talk started. Maybe you want to go and roll your own. However, I highly recommend using these templates because they use JavaScript services, et cetera. So does anyone, should I take a second to point that out? There's crazy stuff going on inside of JavaScript services. For instance, things like it makes it easy to set up hot module reloading. It makes it easy to do things like, because you'll have Webpack transpiling code, if you save something and you're doing this hot reload and you hit a URL and it's still transpiling, it actually uses a file provider that pretends to start serving the file immediately while it's being compiled, and will kind of wait until it compiles and then send it down. So all this kind of magic stuff that's happening, that was Most of that was, there was a lot of community involvement, but it was mostly started by Steve Sanderson, who's now working on Blazor and one of the sharpest people I know. So cool. This thing here, this change authentication, I used to stress over this. I don't really anymore because you can scaffold in identity now. So we can create this without identity and scaffold it in really easily later. So cool, we're going to do that. And then we'll drop a bunch of stuff in here and start turning on some cool features. So after web, I'm immediately going to put in a test project. And I'm just going to do that just to have it there right from the beginning. We're going to add in some health checks as functional tests later. Functional tests later. Okay, so we'll drop in XUnit test project, and I'm going to monkey with this in a bit. So we'll call this. Okay. And cool. And I'm going to have to mess with that to make that work, but cool. So I'm going to throw in a few other things. One is we've already got a get ignore and a get attributes. The way we can see that, Visual Studio kind of hides that. If you click this little button way up here where it says solutions and folders, this actually toggles this view, and you can see the folder and you can see stuff that's in there. So if we zoom out here, there it is. So now I've got a get attributes and a get ignore. So those are handy to put in right off the bat. I'm also into that, I'm going to drop in a editor config. Not that way, though. That was not good. Maybe, so this is a little funky. You end up kind of toggling back and forth in order to add things. So I'm going to do add. So the idea with editor config is it will, it sets up your coding standards or your coding conventions. So here I'm going to use an editor config. All right, so this editor config has all this kind of stuff in here. And I'm going to change something in here that's going to make some people shriek. But for instance, you can do things like set up an indent size, or how your usings are set up, or all that kind of stuff. So that's nice too, especially if you're working with a group of people. If you can set that up right at the beginning, that makes it easy. Everybody's at the IDE level, it actually enforces that. And there's actually a project. This is a standard thing. So editor config is a thing that's out there in the community. It's something we just have noticed and adopted, but it works in just about any, works in Vim, works all over the place. So there you go. I'm actually going to go in and change something in mine. I prefer tabs. I'll understand if you walk out, but that's me. So I actually feel like it's the whole I prefer SVG over a PNG. I'd rather have like vector art, something that describes something, rather than something that's like down to the pixel. And to me, a tab feels like I'm describing an indent versus a space is like a pixel of indentation. I don't know. I'm wacky. Cool. So we have, go ahead and you can walk out, sir. That's fine. Okay, so we've got our editor config. We have, let me see if there's anything else I'd wanted to add there. I have a little cheat sheet going on here. I have mini cheat sheets. Yeah, that'll probably do it. Editor config, get ignore. We're good to start. Okay, so that is a decent solution structure that we've got set up. And this is something where, like I said, any shop, anywhere you work at, you're going to have standard kind of stuff. I talked to several people before this and said, what do you do and stuff. The important thing is if you can standardize on something, that's great. If you have, for instance, things like if you have samples or if you have, tests or if you have documentation, get those folders and things set up at the beginning. So cool, there we go. Let us look now at, so we've got a good starting template. We've got our source control and solution structure set up. So now let's take a look at our front end. So what I want to do with my front end, I've got a few things I want to do here. One is, you'll notice here we're using Bootstrap, and it's Bootstrap 4. So this is a I'm going to set it back to there. Cool. So our newer templates, the previous templates had Bootstrap, but they had a bunch of markup in them. So the newer templates are Bootstrap 4, and they're really pretty slimmed down. So there's kind of all the stuff set up as far as making Bootstrap work, but there's not a whole lot of markup in there. So we're going to do a couple of minor tweaks with that. Just let it go here, make sure my website actually runs, because that's a good thing. Maybe not. Cool. All right, so yeah, as you can see, pretty slimmed down here. So one thing I'd like to do is I actually want to start managing my dependencies, not as static files. There's different ways you can pull in your dependencies, your front-end dependencies. If we look at this right now, the way it's set up, these are actually, and this has gone through a bunch of change over time. These are now just, so the way it's set up, I've got my custom CSS and JavaScript. These are ones I've created, and then there's a lib folder here, and those are libraries I'm pulling in, vendor libraries. So we used to have like Grunt, and we had Gulp, and we had Bower. We've gone through all these different phases with this. It's really hard to keep up with them. They change quite a bit over time. For a while, it was like, hey, Bower's nice and lightweight, and then Bower was deprecated, and they said, don't, just use NPM. NPM's great if you have a reason to use NPM besides dropping a file on your disk, go for it. Like, that's cool, right? And that's something where if you look at the those front-end templates that I showed, Angular and React, those have integration with NPM, right? So that's cool. However, if all you want to do is use jQuery, and you're not going to develop jQuery, and you're not going to do anything else with jQuery, I kind of feel like it's overkill to set up a whole NPM build just for that, or a Webpack build just for that. So it's up to you. People have strong opinions on that, et cetera, but you don't have to do that, okay? So here's what we've got is we've got Bootstrap, we've got a disk folder, and we've got a file on disk. So we have a few CSS, we've got grid, reboot, and the CSS file, and then we've got Bootstrap.js. These are not minified. And the reason for that is because if we look at our layout, there's actually a production and a local setup here. So if we look at how these are pulled in, we're using tag helper. Zoom a bit. So there's a tag helper here, an environment tag helper. So this is not rendered out. This is evaluated on the server, and it says, if I'm running in development, then actually link to the files on disk, right? Because I may want to debug them, I'm testing them out, I've got them local. If I'm running anywhere else, so test, production, stage, whatever you call it, then it's going to try and pull it from a CDN. And it has a system in place where it actually, it verifies that the file loaded from the CDN. If not, then it's going to pull it locally. So those are tag helpers, and those are just kind of set up for us. However, I can go in and I can manage. The problem is that these are just straight references. There's no easy way to manage these. There's no easy way to update them or anything like that. So what I kind of prefer to do is instead use this thing called libman. So if you go in here and you say, manage client-side libraries. So this, And there, like I said, there's other ways of doing it. This is something where we had people say, gosh, I like Bower, but Bower's gone away, and really all I want to do is get a file, get the latest built, distributed version of something. I don't want all their sample code. I don't want all their source. I don't want all their TypeScript or whatever. I just want the JavaScript file on my computer to serve it up. And then I also want to be able to point at the CDN if needed, right? So I can go in here and I can start pulling in a library. So for instance, if I want, let's go with jQuery. So this is a little funky, and I'm going to switch over to one that I've set up before because syntax is a bit weird. And I don't know honestly if I'm doing something funky with it, but it has a UI, but it doesn't always show for me. I'm not sure what's up with that. So here, if I go library, nope. Libraries, oh, I need. There we go. So you do get IntelliSense. It will find libraries that are out there. So I can go in and I can say, like, okay, for instance, I want jQuery, right? So there's jQuery. It gets the latest version for me. And now I need to do some things like tell it what files I want and where to put it. So what I'm going to want to do is go, and I'm not going to make you watch me type this all. I've got a completed file. But I like this ability to kind of go through and kind of have it managed. And you can also do things like have it on restore. You can have it kind of restore those packages and stuff, right? So here I'm saying drop it in jQuery libdist. And then what's also cool here is there's a lot of stuff that's out on the CDN for jQuery, and all I really want is, jQuery, right? So that is that. So now I can do things like it'll actually remove and replace things and stuff as I go. So if I look at, here's my jQuery dist, there's that, and I can do, like, for instance, if I right-click on the libman file, so it's creating a libman.json file, libman for library manager. If I right-click on that, then I can do things like clean client-side libraries, and it should actually get rid of that jQuery, and I'm not sure if it did or didn't, or if I have the wrong one. Here, if I say restore, and maybe I need to save first. You may have to trust me on this. So, and I'm actually going to skip ahead by copying in the rest of this. So what I've done is I've gone through and I've copied out, like you saw me type in jQuery, and here's also pulling in a few others. And I'll show you some that I would pull in. So first of all, we've got Bootstrap, and I pointed out we're using Bootstrap. And that includes a grid, a reboot, and a CSS, and then there's also Bootstrap JS. So I've got that set up. Let's try one more time and see, because what it's supposed to do is actually it does this whole, like, you can configure it to, there it is. You saw flicker there as it restores on. So you can say, you can set it up to enable restore on build. And so every time I build my application, then it's going to restore those libraries. So again, if you are building a JavaScript-heavy application, if you're using something like TypeScript, and you need transpilation on the front end, any of that stuff, that's great. There's good support for Gulp and for Webpack and for NPM in Visual Studio and can work well with .NET and ASP.NET Core. But if you really are just looking at, hey, I need to have this library, the latest release of this file on disk, you can use libman for that. So cool. I want to show off, oh, and let's look at how that was set up here. So if we go to, here's my CS proj, and there it is. So it actually added a reference to librarymanager.build. And so that's how it's configuring that to restore on build, right? So cool. And the reason I like doing that personally is this gets me away from having these are my only references. I would rather have something a little more formal. I'd rather have my dependencies, my front-end dependencies listed out. So there was one that I snuck in there that I didn't really mention, and that is Ionicons. The reason I'm doing that is Bootstrap in the past included glyph icons, and so you had all these glyphs that you could use. And they stopped doing that. There was, I forget honestly the reason why. It was I don't know if it was licensing or whatever reason, but they stopped doing that. So now if you go to Bootstrap, and icons. Cool. They have a list of several different icons that they recommend. They have these preferred ones, but even that, when I went through this list, for instance, they're like, oh, great, use Iconic. So then, cool, let's check out Iconic. And then, right, so I'm not so happy with that one. So I kind of worked my way down the list, and I liked this Ionicons, partly because, well, they're all pretty similar. This one does have some nice features. It's pretty lightweight. They have, you can use SVG versions as well as web fonts. So, pick what you want. I actually ended up using this. We did a workshop Monday and Tuesday, and we taught a thing where we had a conference browser where you could add and remove sessions to your conference browser. And the way you did that was there was a star button. And it was an empty star, and then you click on it, and it fills in. And somewhere on this list, there's a star, right? So we have an empty and a full star, and so I like those. So the one other thing you have to do is you actually have to, in order to use it, you need to drop in the script reference. So here, this is where you would go in and add that. So I'm not going to make you watch me type that. That is this right here, this, right? So, and I would set that up using this whole environment fallback. So I would say, in development, use the one that's in my dist folder. In production, add the link over here. Cool. So that's kind of my quick look. And again, this is 1 hour. This is jamming a bunch of stuff into the front end, but this is stuff I would look at. One other thing that I'm not going to do, but I'm just going to point out is a kind of an obvious next step on the front end is a Bootstrap theme. So I'll tell you about a few options there. The way Bootstrap works is it kind of has theming built in a nice way. So they define kind of actions and components and things, and then you can override them in your site.css. Or by dropping a Bootstrap theme CSS file over. So that's kind of a nice way of doing that. Not sure why Google's not responding. Good, cool. So that is an obvious, easy thing to do. Another thing, just to point out that can work well. So yeah, any of these. So the way to handle any of those, you get a CSS file and you just save it in and you add the reference right after the Bootstrap reference. Okay. One other option is there's actually some other theme builders out there. So Telerik has a neat one recently that they've done, and they've linked to it a few times. Ed Charbonneau did a thing recently where he blogged about this and talked about more advanced customization. He actually, in his blog post, he went through and created a, let's see, that's this here. So he went through and actually pulled in the SCSS files and then talked about how you can actually use the Telerik UI theme builder. So this is a pretty smart way to do this. You build a Bootstrap theme, and this includes theming for the application. But then, it includes the default Bootstrap styles, but then it also works with the Telerik controls as well, too, right? So there you go. So this allows you kind of click on your stuff, you click download, and you get a CSS file. So again, those are kind of next steps on front end. All right, we blazed through front end. Let's talk about maintainability. So one thing we've already set up is our tests. So we want to do a few things with tests. First thing is we want to delete unittest1.cs, because that's a dumb file. And I'm actually going to drop a few other tests in here. And just, I think, getting unit tests set up from the beginning is a good place to start. Especially now with functional tests. Especially now because it used to be that a lot of the tests you'd write for an ASP.NET MVC application would be kind of a formality. You would say, does this controller action return, something? Well, yeah, of course it does. What am I actually really testing? And so one of the things that's changed lately is the ability to do to do functional tests. So what you can do is you can hit a URL, and you can say, do I get my expected value from this URL? So instead of just testing at a controller action level, so here I've got a very simple, I'm hitting three, the index, the home, which is also the index, and the privacy policy page. And I'm saying, do I get a 200 back, and is it a text HTML? So, I mean, very simple example of a test. But you can do a lot more advanced things. Scott Hanselman had a series recently where he converted his website, did some major changes with it. And as part of doing that, he had a lot of URL redirection and a lot of kind of quirky things. He also had tests of services he was running against. So he set up all these functional tests and pinged the URLs and said, does the response contain this bit of text or these tags? So what this is doing is testing, as opposed to normally if you're just writing a unit test, you're going to be executing some code. So maybe you're going to be executing something in a page, right? So if we look at, here's my index, there's not really going to be much, Say I had some code here, I could hit on get and get a response back. But that doesn't really tell me anything. It doesn't tell me all that much because there's a lot of other things that happen as part of hitting that URL. As an example, there's middleware. There's a lot of stuff that can happen in middleware. So my middleware could, maybe HTTPS redirection fails. Maybe something about, I don't know, HSTS causes it to be inaccessible. So what's great with those functional tests is we're actually spinning up the server in a lightweight way. We're not actually having to make an HTTP call. So you're not going all the way to like a Selenium-based test, but you're doing a functional test where you're saying, OK, let's call into this URL and tell me what I would get back from it. So this is kind of a nice level of doing that. There's a ton of documentation and examples of this in the docs, Microsoft docs for this. And again, you can build up pretty advanced stuff to see how's my application doing. One thing, so we've talked some about testing. One other thing that we need to look at is there's actually some kind of funky stuff that you need to do in your test. Because the new, if you just drop in an XUnit project test, it doesn't work with the same SDK as the ASP.NET Core one does. Let me just show you the kind of minor changes that you make on this. There's Stack Overflow has posts on this. It's in the XUnit repo. There's some different things, but basically, here there were some architectural changes lately where they moved to this shared framework. And so, so we actually need to be using the web SDK. and we need to have an include reference to ASP.NET Core app. And neither of those things are in the XUnit test to start with. So if we go over here and clutter that up a bit, now we'll actually be able to run our tests, hopefully. And we should see some work and some fail. Yes, I do. Thank you. Kind of hard to test it if it can't find the project. And I'll have to update it as well on my functional test, I believe, because I called it a different name. Cool. See if any of that works. Cool. I'm unable to find 1 hour, and that's because my... Yes, this guy here. Thanks. Did I remove the wrong one? No? Cool. So now we can go in and we can say, run all our tests. We'll see which ones pass and which fail. And while it's doing this, I point out that, of course, all this stuff I'm showing, there's an XUnit runner for console, or there's a XUnit harnesses. All of this could be done from command line. I can manipulate my project, add new get references, and all that stuff. That's all obviously available there too. Let's see what failed. Looks like nothing passed. Good. Okay, so the endpoints succeeded, but my health check failed. So let's look at what's going on with that. So these tests pass. This said, can I get to these pages and do they return a response? So that's cool. This one down here is hitting a URL called health, and that failed. So we're actually going to enable health checks in this application too. So I'm going to go over here, and I will do 2 things in my startup. So we need to, first of all, bring in a NuGet package. This, it defaults to installed, and I'm like, what? And then I have to go over here every single time I use this. So, and I believe, is it health checks MVC? Oh, this one here. And I think I want latest stable. Cool. So what health checks let you do, and this was something David and Damien showed was new in 2.1 or 2.2, I believe 2.2. So what they let you do is actually have testing endpoints for your application. We're going to do a very simple one, which says if I hit an endpoint, if I hit /health on my website, it should return the word healthy. But you can do quite a bit more with that. And you can have other states as well. So if I hit my website, and for instance, let's think about what could go wrong with a website. Maybe a database may fail. Maybe an API endpoint that I need to call is not available. And so my website loads, but it doesn't do everything I need it to do. Maybe there's some feeds missing. So what health checks let you do is write that up in code, and you can say, okay, when I hit /health or slash database health or whatever, let's say slash database health, what it's actually going to do is have some code that says, can I access my database? Can I execute this simple query? Okay, my database exists and is there. Okay, I'm healthy on my database. Just having a health check that says, is my website up is good. Right, so there, if I go to slash health, that didn't work. And that's because we haven't configured it yet. So my website, oh no, it's not accessible, right? So let's go in here. So this one just configures a simple health check that says the site is up. There's a lot more health check examples out there that I mentioned, like checking is my database up, that kind of stuff. So we'll call this health. And I can also do things like specify it's on a separate port. Maybe I don't want these accessible to everyone, or I want to require a separate port in order to hit it, right? So what can I use these for? Well, I could use this for my own personal testing. I can go out and ping the website and stuff. But what's more likely is I'm going to use this for automated testing. So this could be something where there's all kinds of services that'll do things like page you if something's, if my website's down. But what's maybe more important, thanks a lot, buddy. Okay. So must start with slash health. Is that really necessary? I mean, a really good example of how this would be used, though, is think about something like Traffic Manager, right? So I've got, maybe my site is running in Azure, or maybe I've got something else that's, a front-end proxy, and I've got a web farm, and I've got multiple servers up, and I want to direct traffic to a server that's actually up and running, right? So I can use this, and I can, it integrates directly in with health, or with Traffic Manager, and it also can do things like, here's an example where it just says, yes, the site is up, right? So there. Does that work? It's up there. It keeps refreshing when I click on the page. Trust me. I'll do this. So that's cool. Healthy. It's the healthiest site ever. This integrates well with like Traffic Manager, and it'll say, okay, this one is up, but it's degraded. It's slow response time. This one is completely down. This one is up and healthy and fast. Let's send more traffic to that one, right? So that is cool. Now that we've got that in place, we should be able to run our test, and we should be able to see all our tests pass. So run, failed tests. So this is an example, right, where we're actually testing our health check. Our health check is something that's where it takes spinning up the site, hitting a URL, getting a response back. So this is neat to be able to test that without having to do a whole kind of like Selenium level test. Right? Okay, so those are some of the things. Again, if I was going to, my next few hours on this site, I would build in more things. I would build in more health checks, and I would add in more kind of general tests. All right. Let's look at what's left there. Performance. So I want to just look at a couple of things here. I'm going to turn on the world's simplest thing for performance, and then I'll point you at some more kind of advanced things. So we are going to turn on response compression. And there's a lot more. There's actually really good docs on performance. There's kind of a whole checklist in the docs on performance. And so what I would do, dig into more, so compression. what I would do more in the future is dig into more of that stuff like caching. Caching is by far the easiest way to improve performance on a website. This includes caching your data inside your application, and it also includes caching of responses. However, as I was kind of digging into what am I going to do in an hour, this is an application that actually doesn't have a database yet. It doesn't really have much stuff going on. There's not a whole lot that's worthwhile to cache in here that's not already cached. But what I've just done there is added this in. Now I'm ready to turn on compression. So I can say services. And we'll do, so there's services add response compression, and then we can also do is app.use. And so what this does is, if you're running in a server that supports compression, it'll use it. So this is just middleware that we turn on. One of the things that they've added recently is support for Brotli, which is more advanced than some of the others like Deflate or other types of compression, right? Or gzip. So this is literally just something you can turn on, and all of a sudden your site, your site can perform better. So that's pretty cool, and that is a configurable thing. Let me point you at. So if we go to performance, yeah. I think this is kind of a hidden gem on the site. This best practices for performance. So top thing on the list is it says cache aggressively. And so it talks about things like you can use response caching. You can also, and again, there's multiple parts of caching. There's inside your application, if you're getting data, if you're doing something that's expensive, you should put that data, you should store that data away. So there's support for that. But there's also support for a cache tag helper. So that is, if I go into my layout, I believe we've got some cache going on here. Looks like no. So we can easily cache just about anything. So say I wanted to cache my footer, I can go in here and I can say, right? So there's support for both cache and distributed cache. So what's the difference? Cache is just going to be local on this. However, if I've got multiple servers up, then distributed cache is going to, it can use a Redis backend or a SQL Server backend, and it can keep those in sync, right? So those are really easy to turn on. That is definitely the next second hour or third hour. Those are things I'd start to look at as I'm loading data in, is make sure that you're using caching. And like it says in the docs, use caching very aggressively. That is on sites I maintain, that is where I spend a lot of time, is just making sure that caching is optimal, right? Okay, so that is some performance stuff. I want to look at a couple of things for SEO. And that should be on my list, and it's not. So two things I want to do as far as SEO. And this is near and dear to my mind because I actually, at site I'm working on, we got an SEO audit, which at first I'm like, oh, great. And by the end of it, I was like, this is awesome. I learned so much stuff, or I was reminded of so much stuff that I was not doing. One very simple thing is to add in a sitemap XML. So there's different ways you can do that. I actually cheesed out on mine as a short workaround, and I just went to one of these one-off sites and said, generate me a sitemap XML, and it spidered my site, and it got the data as of that day. But it's not dynamic. So what I'd rather use is something that actually is internally generating this. So I'm using this one called DuckSoft, because that's just a cool name. And it's a Razor sitemap generator. It is a little bit funky to set up. There is documentation in there about how to do it, but it's not. It took me fiddling around a little bit to do it. Maybe it's because of the jet lag. Let's blame the jet lag. But so what this does is, if I go. there's two ways we could go about this. One is we go to Ducksoft. There. So he has kind of in the repo, it says, do this, as far as how to set it up. And so the basic kind of configuration to this is I need to create an extension method. So I need to create a static class and drop this in there. So I actually kind of agonize over where to put stuff like this. Sometimes I'll create something called like services or infrastructure. It's basically just stuff. So I don't know, we'll call it utils for today. And then we'll add in a class called extension methods. Cool. So now we can drop in his code there. And this is an extension method that will allow me to configure this dynamic route. And again, the reason we're doing this is so that we can have an up-to-date sitemap, because when any kind of, when Google and Bing, whenever a search engine spiders your site, you want to provide them with information. What are the links that you should be indexing? How recently are they updated? What's the weighting on them and all that? And so you can drop in a static sitemap.xml, but that is static and doesn't keep up to date. What's a lot better is if we can drop something in that actually does stay up to date. So here I'm going to go into my, drop this in configure services. Cool. Control.our-way to glory. Probably have done something wrong. What? No, that shouldn't be public configure services. Is it just saying to delete that line? That's it. Cool. Yes, thanks. That's funky docs, right? Should send a pull request. Cool, so now what this is going to do is allow me to go out and browse to sitemap.xml, and it's actually going to give me an error because I haven't control dotted that in. Cool. All right, so there's one other thing, and I'm just going to show you the code for it. We're not going to go through and do it because I want to kind of do some wrap-up stuff. But the other thing that I would do is show you also lowercasing URLs. And basically having canonical URLs is important so that they're weighted correctly, right? There's a few ways to do that. So okay, so this is hitting my site and generating out a sitemap XML. There's no style, which scares me, but it's actually, this is showing the stuff. And this, I like this library. It was updated as of, a couple of weeks ago, so it's pretty well updated. And it also has support where, there's attributes you can put on things, and you can kind of keep it up to date. So that is cool. So I was talking about canonical URLs. That's actually super easy, and I could just paste this code in there because it's a one-liner. It's part of the routing configuration. So if I go in and say, oh, I forgot mini profiler. That's also important. And we got to do that. Okay, cool. So as part of our startup configuration, we can go in here and we can say, say stop running, Control-Shift, F5. Cool. So we're going to do two other things. Okay, on time. That was not the one I wanted to hit. Okay. So this is just a one-liner, and this is to, what are you doing? Stop it. It's a one-liner, and it basically sets the option for your routing. So you're configuring routing, and you're saying use lowercase URLs. Now, the more advanced way to do this, and what really you should do, is redirect. So if someone hits the uppercase URL, you should actually redirect to the lowercase to make sure that's the one that's spidered. All right. Well, it's doing what it's doing. I'm going to go out and show one other, which I think is important, is Mini Profiler. So Mini Profiler is something from the Stack Exchange team. It's very easy to just drop into a site, and it allows you to see kind of your up-to-date. It allows you in the site to see what the performance impact of things is. So the way of adding it in, you grab this NuGet package. You do just a couple of steps in order to configure it. I'm going to show you them, and then I'll just show a running site with that. So you do the same thing. Add Mini Profiler, use Mini Profiler. And then there's, you have to go out into your layout, and you have to, in your view imports, and then you add a little one-liner in your layout. When you do that, you get, this application is just never going to stop running. That's it. You get a cool little thing up in the corner that allows you to see the impact of stuff. And it's very configurable. You can put, there's a tag helper where you can have it log out specific information. So we'll see that. And while this is loading, I want to tell you about the last kind of thing with this is a lot of manual work. This is a lot of now do this, and wouldn't it be nice if I could just automate this and have this available every time I run my app? So there's really a few solutions to this. One is that there are already out there some pretty good templates. There's ASP.NET Boilerplate is one. The people from ASP.NET Boilerplate are here. Yep, there you go. So they have a great solution that includes a whole architecture. So it includes multi-tenancy. It includes it's a sophisticated, kind of more advanced thing than you're able to do in an hour. So if you're building an application that is going to, require, like I said, multi-tenancy, but then a lot of other things pre-configured for you, this is a great kind of starting place. Another is .NET Boxed. And again, this is something where there's some templates. This is something where it's kind of it's pre-canned for you as an as a template. One final thing, though, that I'd recommend as another option that you can do is you can very easily create your own template from a solution. And it's seriously just a couple of lines of code, or a couple of lines in the console. So here's this .NET Boxed. But instead, let's say I've gone through, I didn't show that. Let's say I've gone through and created this template like I just did. I can create a template and I can package it up in NuGet and distribute it, or I can just have it file on disk and I can say, this is my template. Every time I create a new application, use this as my template for it. So I'm going to go and show you what that looks like. So here, if I go to, I can say .NET new, .NET new, and I pointed at a directory. Nothing's zooming for me today. Let me read it to you. Nice, beautiful. So here what I've said is .NET new -I, and that says install. And what's cool with that is that if I can point it at a NuGet package, but I can also just say .NET new -I and give it a folder on my disk. And there's one thing that I need to do first in order for this to be able to be packaged up. and that is for my computer to freak out. What are you doing? It's like, you've got 2 minutes left, John, so let's explode. Okay. You create a folder, you put a JSON file in it, you tell it just a few things. You tell it what you want your template to be called, you tell it what your name is and that kind of stuff for publishing. You also oh boy. Yes. Okay, let me show this just real quick. So you also tell it how you want, what your replacement is. So I don't want every single thing that I create to have the same name. I want it to actually replace stuff. And so I've gone in here. This is called 1hour.solution. And if I look at the folder on disk, it's got a template file. So, I fill out some very simple stuff. If you look up .ASP.NET templating, it'll show you how to do this. But literally just, 6 lines in your JSON. So I've called this one ASP.NET Solution. And so again, this is a folder on disk, all the stuff that we've just built out this hour. We call this command to, let's see if it, I don't know what may have just shut off. Okay, so what I do, what I do in that console is I say, I say .NET new -I, give it a folder, and then later I can say .NET new ASP.NET Core Solution, and I say -N for what the replacement is. I don't want every time I use this, I don't want every single one to be called ASP.NET Core Solution, right? So I say -N, my London project, and when I do that, it creates that exact same thing. So all the stuff that we saw there, all the NuGet package references, all the markup front-end changes, all the testing, all the folder structure, the editor config, all that stuff is pre-configured for me. So I think that is kind of where I'd want to end up with. I will be tweeting out, apparently my computer rebooted on me, which is awesome. I will be tweeting out if you're following me at Jon Galloway, or if you got that link at the beginning, that also will have all these references. So I actually have a bunch of tabs and stuff that I'm going to be copying in. I didn't know exactly what I would cover, so I'll be updating that gist with the information. So thanks a lot. I hope you had a lot of fun. I hope you learned something. I hope you disagreed with me on some stuff, because that's part of it too. But I want you to be thinking about, how do I want to structure my application and not get 2 weeks down the road and say, oh, I didn't even put in a get ignore. Oops, right? So thanks a lot for your time.
Just one question.
Yeah.
That document new to create from a template that you created before.